Hello and welcome back to the first impressions video I think in probably close to a year. Today I'm going to be talking about the new Vampire Weekend album, which came out, I believe, somewhere between 2 and 3 months ago now. The Father of the Bride, and I'm just going to be kind of giving you my opinions on it, what I think the highlights are, the lowlights, general impressions, what have you. This is not a super new album to me because I listened to it when it came out. I didn't bother to download like a digital file or buy the CD or anything until the day before yesterday when I found it for $5 used, which, I'm always a sucker for paying $3 to $4 less than I was going to pay for it anywhere else, so naturally I snapped that up. And yeah, I was really impressed by it on second and third listens. Like, the first impression was, I'm not going to lie to you, was not good. The main reason I did not pick up a digital or physical copy of this until 2 days ago was that the first time I listened to it, I was extremely underwhelmed. Like, I didn't really know what to make of it. But that's kind of been a common thing for me with Vampire Weekend, because the only record of theirs that I think really gelled with me the first time, and I was like, yeah, that's really good, was their debut. Because even like Modern Vampires of the City, which really like, the first time I listened to it, I was like, oh, I don't like that they got rid of the world beat. And with this one, it was kind of the same. Like, my first impressions of the album would, if I'd filmed this then, it probably would have been, they sound old. Because they do. And that's something I'm probably going to spend a lot of time talking about on this album, because I actually this album, re-listening to it, made me actually look up how old Ezra Koenig is. And I was actually very surprised to find that he's only 35, because he does not sound 35. The band do not sound mid-30s on here. They sound mid-40s. Because this album, and parts of this album more so, really lean into that like 70s adult pop rock kind of AOR stuff. Like, you could almost hear some of this stuff getting played on country radio in the 70s. Like, that's the kind of vibe that I get from parts of this album. But it's and maybe unsurprisingly, it's mostly the stuff that, Danielle Haim guests on, because Haim to me are one of those bands, and I hate to say this about acts because I hate people, because I don't like people who are like, music today, why listen to new music when you have old music? I don't like that attitude, but Haim always kind of gave me the vibe of, why wouldn't you just listen to Fleetwood Mac? That was always my take on Haim, and I kind of get that vibe at times from this album, but not much. It's actually a lot better at keeping my interest and sustaining it over recurring listens than I thought it was going to be. And actually, the first 2 times I listened to it, I thought it was way too long. I listened to it again today, and the length didn't bother me at all, but it's a grower, I think. Unless you're super into that sound that I just talked about, that kind of 70s adult pop, very mellow, very chilled out, male and female vocals, etc. And I realized I just made it sound like that was the entire album. That is not the entire album. It's just what I kind of wanted to emphasize, because they lost one of their main members in between Modern Vampires and this album. I believe left the band for whatever reason, and when a band that had 2 or more main creative people loses one of those people, there's always a bit of an element of, what did they bring to the table, and seeing what they brought to the table that's gone on the new album. And with this, I feel like what's gone, what seems to have left with him, is kind of the quirky, zany weirdness of their early records. Like, there was a kind of juxtaposition in their first 3 albums of elements that don't quite belong. I mean, yeah, Modern Vampires chucked out a lot of the weirdness of the first 2 records, but there was still some really strange, offbeat moments. Like, there were some really noisy parts of that album, and then there was the weird vocal manipulations that were all, pitch shifting and, weird stuff all over that album. Almost all of that is gone here. And when you find it, it's on individual tracks. In fact, something that repeatedly struck me when I was listening to it today is that this album feels like 3 very different albums kind of crammed together. Like, one of them is kind of the follow-up to Modern Vampires that I kind of figured they were going to do. The other one is as I just said earlier, sort of 70s adult pop rock AOR album with one of the women from Haim. And the rest of the album there's some really weird stuff that really, really impressed me that I did not think they were going to do. And that's really the stuff that's gonna, bring me back to the album. That being said, there is some kind of annoying songs, and I'll talk about that. As far as the highlights, Harmony Hall needs to really be talked about. That's more following up on the previous album, and it actually reuses a lyric from the previous album, which I think is great, because it's that line, "I don't want to live like this, but I don't want to die," which is a great lyric. And I don't think it really quite fit the song that they used it on Modern Vampires of the City. I think it works better as the end of a chorus than it does in its original context. This Life is just a lot of fun. It has this really interesting sort of late 60s screwball comedy soundtrack song vibe to it, like especially the sort of the guitar lines and the choruses. It reminds me of like something that would have been in a movie, set on the West Coast in the late 60s about just goofiness. I really like it. Buried in a Gold Rush is a really cool duet. I really like that. For as much as I did sort of talk some smack about the more mellow adult sort of songs, I like most of them. Sympathy is probably my favorite song on the album. It's just this really weird kind of Latin-y marching kind of song that with these interesting sort of choir moments about maybe religion, but also betrayal and personal relationships and something like that. I don't know what it's about. I have absolutely no clue what it's about. I just really like the music. And then you have Sunflower, which features Steve Lacy, who I have never heard of before. And he's younger than I am, which is very interesting to me. Sunflower is really, really good, kind of a funky track, real throwback to the 70s, but what really blows me away is the drumming, which reminds me more of Can than any kind of funk or R&B or soul track from any period of time. Like, it really, in fact, it specifically reminds me a lot of the drumming on Halaloa on Tagomago. And I'll probably insert some little clips of them side by side. I'm not saying it's the same drum pattern at all. It just kind of sounds that way to me. And then 2021 I'm going to mention only because when I was looking at the album booklet after I got the CD, I was like, why does Haruomi Hosono have a writing credit on that song? And so I looked into it, and they sampled a track of his, which is just cool to me because I'm a huge YMO fan, and I really like all of Hosono's side projects that I've heard, although that being said, I have not heard that many. The one critique I very much do have of this album, though, is that it kind of just ends with a whimper. There's no big conclusion, and in fact, really, the last 3 tracks I feel like are kind of superfluous. Like, you could kind of throw most of the last 1/4 of the album away, and you really wouldn't lose anything. You know, I don't really think the album drags to quite the degree that I think a lot of my friends feel that it does. But by the same token, I think they could have stood to cut probably 5 or 6 tracks out of this. You know, I do not think it needed to be 18 tracks. I think it probably could have been 12 tracks easily. And it probably would have been a way stronger album for it. And you know, that's really my final thoughts on The Father of the Bride is somewhere in the sprawl of these 18 tracks is the best Vampire Weekend album that has ever been made. But taken as a whole, it's gotta be probably, I think it would be number 3, because I think Modern Vampires and the debut are better than this. But all in all, it's a very strong album, and you know, it was one of the first new albums I heard this year, and which all I really have to say about that is that the best of list at the end of the year is going to be a lot harder to do than it was last year. But yeah, so I will see you guys later, maybe with another First Impressions, maybe with the very belated weekly album spotlight, but who knows. Anyway,